like fucking 400,000 viewers on Twitch, bro. 400,000. Can you imagine 400,000 people in a stadium? I'm pretty sure that's bigger than most stadiums. But it's like the thing with like esports athletes though is that they get the freedom to basically kind of create, I don't know, with regular sports brands or sports athletes too, I guess they can do this, like where they can create like their own personal brand and kind of like, you know, like monetize themselves through like Instagram or like Twitch or YouTube and all that, you know.
They can, but the thing is, there's so much corruption in esports, and honestly, a lot of esports teams are very, very shitty. Like, just not okay. They're not shitty business people, but they're just really bad at business. They don't utilize their brand and their name effectively at all. Because a lot of esports teams are founded by like former players, and most professional players, like esports players, didn't like end up going to college. Whereas a lot of like professional sports players, they like football, basketball, and things like that. They come up through like the college system.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they at least possibly have a degree to fall back on or something of the sort, and have like education and like, you know, that different culture of experiencing so many different people on a university campus. Whereas like for esports, you might meet a whole bunch of different people in your league and thing like that and team, but it's maybe 50 to 100 people, whereas in college you meet thousands of people.
Yeah.
If you put yourself out there at least.
Well, I mean, they even have like esports like I guess like programs and stuff now, like in colleges, you know. Like
they do, but how heavily funded are they?
Not like super heavily funded, but like I think it was like the University of Kentucky or something, like put like a couple $1 million into like investing into it or something. Like I saw they had like a huge like renovation of like their esports like rooms and shit, and like yeah, it was pretty crazy. I was like, fuck, how do I sign up for this? But you know, it's like I get that like their viewership and stuff like comes down to like how much like they get paid and all that, but it's like if they were like on the same level like as regular athletes, like wouldn't society kind of view them like that, and wouldn't like the market kind of dictate like that they would get paid the same, you know? And not only that, I think esports players still get paid a fuck ton, dude.
I feel like it really just depends on the region of the world you're playing in. I know for like just comparing the League of Legends scene, as from like region to region, like in North America, they get paid ridiculous amounts, and it's considered like the worst region in the world, at least like the worst major region. And then you have like the best regions like in Korea and China, and they're getting paid like a fraction of the amount. Like there's like a joke for like the league scene that like all good pro players, when they want to go retire, they just go to North America because they get paid a shit ton.
Really?
Yeah, because the region's so trash, and they want to import like good players because there's like weird import restrictions and things like that. Well, that's another thing too to compare between different sports and teams is like importing players, especially like in soccer. Like you can have a whole team from so many different countries like, that are not even from your continent or anything like that. And in like esports, there's like you can have like a limit of like 2 people from a different region or something like that on your team.
Oh, really?
On your starting lineup, yeah. So like league, you can only like in North America, you can only have 2 people that are not from your region on your starting lineup.
Huh? I did not know that. That's crazy. Yeah, but like with like I don't know, it's not very like common in like I know like football to like recruit people from like outside of like the country and stuff, out of the United States, you know. Like
Football and basketball are bad and baseball are bad examples because they're essentially American sports.
Yeah.
They're not like
yeah, I was gonna say like I don't know like how it works with like soccer and stuff. Like if like the Brazilian team, if they're all from like Brazil or something, or if like you know like.
Well, no, okay. So essentially, how like soccer teams like work is they have clubs that are in their respective country.
Oh, okay.
So like they'll be like, I'm a Barcelona fan, so like that's in Spain. It's the club is located in that city, and then they can import players from different regions. Obviously, if you're having like the FIFA Cup where you're playing for a specific country, you can't fucking grab Ronaldo for your French team. You know, that guy plays for Portugal. Yeah, that's his country.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I feel that. Okay. So, you know, one thing that like I kind of like started like thinking about was that like what if like, because we've seen esports like on the rise. Like the reason we're having this topic is because like esports is becoming like a way bigger thing, you know. And like we've both like considered like pursuing careers in like esports, you know, like League of Legends, World of Warcraft, whatever it may be. But we've both considered that because like they're making like more money now. So it got me thinking about like how much money like they're gonna like make in the future, you know. And like we were just talking about like their like current like pay, how like it's like uneven due to like viewership. Like, do you think like over time like the viewers for like esports are gonna be more than like the viewers for like regular athletes or like traditional sports?
I don't think so, because of the stigma that just surrounds esports. At least it'll be a really long time before that even becomes like comparable. And then you also have to consider the fact that video games come and go and they get replaced by a better game in their genre.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard for video games to gain a following because there might just be a better game in that genre that this comes around. And some people might want to stick to their old game instead of going to the new game just because that's just what they prefer. Maybe they have a lot of time invested into that account, a lot of money invested into it too. Whereas regular sports, tennis, football, basketball, soccer, volleyball, they don't change. Nothing changes about them. There might maybe very rarely a new team might come into play.
A new rule or something.
Yeah, a new rule, something like that. And every like few years, maybe a couple like new rookies will come. Every year, not every few years. Every year, a new rookie will come into the spotlight and be like, "Oh, damn, this guy could be another good player." And it's all the same sport. Nothing's changed, just the names. Whereas, you know,
the thing is though, is that like we can see like a decline in like traditional sports like popularity. You know, like as like esports like has gotten like more popular like with our generation and Gen Z, like we can see like a decline in like traditional sports like popularity, you know, like with like American football, baseball, and like basketball and like even soccer like views are like down like overall, you know.
Well, when was the statistic taken that you were like referencing?
I think it was like 2016. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was gonna say that could be different.
Like it said it was down compared to previous years, you know. So I don't know how like it was like down like compared to like I can't remember it exactly like what the percentages were, you know, like over like the last like 30 years or so. But like yeah, like so it said it was down like compared to like the like recent previous years. So like and that's in the recent 10 years is when esports has been rising, you know. So that's why I'm saying like there's a comparison there.
That's fair, but like the thing is with esports, like we were talking about earlier, like the viewership for like esports like has some crazy numbers, but generally those crazy numbers come from like the world championship final, like that one match of the year, or maybe those like maybe 5 or 6 like matches of the year that happen that are really hyped between the two best teams in the world that everybody wants. Whereas traditional sports, like even if you have 2 shitty teams, you can pull in some pretty big numbers. 2 shitty players pull in pretty big numbers.
But even like with like traditional sports, like them like having like that like larger like viewership, still like we can see that like with certain sports like people are starting at like younger ages, you know what I mean, or not starting at younger ages, like they're actually starting later in those sports to like prevent like young kids like from getting injured, you know, because like injuries at like young ages is usually what ruins a kid's or like someone's career for like that potential sport, you know.
I guess it just depends on the respective sport. Again, if it's a physical contact sport, yeah, that would make more sense.
Yeah.
But like other sports, that's a lot of the kids that are just great started when they were just really tiny. And also had good coaches around them too, because that's one huge problem is anybody that's played the sport thinks they can be a coach.
That's true. It takes a certain type of mentality and leadership to be a coach.
Yeah, it's not even that. It's just like who's to show that like you actually understood the sport.
Yeah.
You know, just because you are on a winning team does not mean you were a good player.
Yeah.
You understood how to play the sport effectively. Maybe you were just really talented at one thing and you just don't understand that's a major crucial thing that pertains to the sport, and you don't understand that made you a good player and why that made you a good player.
Yeah. The thing with like growth though, like in society, is that like we've seen like technological growth, has been like usually exponential. And what I'm saying with like the whole like viewership is going down and like people are starting at like younger ages, like people are being more drawn to like esports like anyways. So like I'm pretty sure, like, dude, I think within the next, like, probably 50s or, like, 100 years, they're probably going to be comparable, like, in viewership. Like, in terms of, like, how much, like, revenue and stuff they generate, too. Because you got to think of, like, overhead costs, too, for, like, creating an esport versus, like, a traditional sport, you know?
I feel like that really just depends. First of all, the stigma has to change because, imagine parents nowadays hearing their kids saying, I want to be a professional basketball, football, soccer player versus I want to be a professional video game player. The parent instantly is just not going to be as supportive or receptive to it just because of the stigma behind it.
Mm-hmm.
There's that. There's the massive amounts of corruption that are in esports compared to regular sports. Yeah, there's corruption in regular sports.
I was going to say, bro, there was big corruption in regular sports still.
There is. But in esports, it's a lot less regulated, and things just happen, and there's not a lot of representation.
Because esports people don't know how to like stand up for themselves because of like education, typically. I think.
Yeah, and generally, there's.
I don't know that for a fact, but like I just know like most esports people aren't usually like business people, also, you know. And also, it's so new. Like companies are looking to take advantage of esports players because it's such a new industry, you know.
The thing is also when you're like getting into esports, a lot of these kids are getting recruited when they're like 15, 16, 17, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of professional athletes, they're at least in their
18, you know, to 19, 20, 21, 22, 23.
20, like those are like really insane,
like basketball players usually.
Yeah, and at least you're 20 years old. That's like you grow
baseball
so much.
Players too.
To 20, dude.
Mm-hmm. Tennis players. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm just stuck on that.
No, you're good. Like it's just between like that mental age. Like you just don't understand what's going on, what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
The realities of the world. You just kind of started thinking for yourself a little bit at that age.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's why like the pay is so different, because it's like when you look at like the actual revenue that esports generates, I think it's pretty comparable to like regular sports.
I honestly don't know. I haven't looked into the numbers of that, but I think the factor that might also contribute into that is the number of pro players, or like people aspiring to be pros in each respective field versus like sports versus esports. I feel like in esports, like not a lot of people really care to like become pros in like whatever game they're playing versus like regular sports where like it's literally like you'll see it in some kids, like, you know, when like what do you want to be when you grow up, like thing when like first and second grade, they'll be like, oh, I want to be a professional this, I want to be number one in the world at that, and it like has to do with sports.
Yeah.
Or something in the arts or something like that.
You know, going back to like what you said earlier about like parents like usually like being like supportive about like someone wanting to be a professional like football player or basketball player versus them saying I want to be a professional video game player. In my personal experience and like what I know about like parents and stuff, they're usually not supportive in like either, because like most parents usually will tell you, they're like, oh, do you know how hard it is to like actually make it, you know, like do you know like how difficult, like how many hours of work you're gonna have to put in, like do you know how much practice you're gonna have to do, you know, like parents like I feel typically do try to like discourage kids, and like you said, like the stigma has to change, but like I think you're kind of wrong about where the stigma is, you know. I think parents kind of more have a defeatist mindset, you know.
Well, no, there's that, but there's also like the fact that like, okay, for the most part, like most parents don't like tell their kid that they're not going to make it. Like they'll bring these like points to light and like tell them like, oh, do you like know about this? But most parents aren't going to like tell their kid that they can't make it or something like that. They'll support them. I think that the biggest thing though, what it comes to it is the lifestyle that it promotes, and the like the health benefits and things like that of doing sports versus esports. Whereas like when you're doing a sport, you're naturally getting health benefits. Whereas if you're sitting in front of a computer 8+ hours a day trying to get good at it, it's not good for your eyes. It's not good for your like personal health. You're not doing anything to like actually, your cardiovascular health, your muscular health, like any health at all.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely like that like health aspect to it that makes regular or traditional sports like definitely more beneficiary or benefits you more, than like esports, like obviously. But like I don't know, society like changes and like evolves, and like you said, like esports, like people like have like trainers to like train them to like work out and stuff so that they stay in shape, so that like all that. So it's like if they can still make a career out of it and like stay in good shape, like then what's really the difference,
Well, no, this is the biggest point is from the parents' point of view, and this like whole like physical trainers getting into esports, that's a new thing, and that's being done by like top teams. This is not being done by like all teams and things like that. There's like still like, because esports is such a new thing, like as far as like it becoming something to make money off of and like actually profit off of having a team, that they're still like learning like what they still haven't even clearly defined like what like a coach is, and like what their role is, what a general manager does. Sometimes you have like a general manager on one team that's doing the roles of a coach, and then a general manager on another team is actually just recruiting players and looking for players to come to their team and things like that. So like the roles are not clearly defined in all these organizations, whereas like in traditional sports, if somebody tells you like, oh, you have a general manager for your football team, everybody knows what the general manager is responsible for.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so as we're like talking about like their like current roles, like I kind of want to throw like a quick like hypothetical at you. Like what if like so like is like esports like evolves and like video games and stuff like change, like as you said earlier, like video games are going to change like over a long period of time, right? And people may want to stick with like their other video games. What if like we get to the point where video games are like you're doing, where like how they have like FIFA and like Madden and all that? What if it's like now a video game but like you're inside of the video game? Then like are you like, do you think that's like more athletic now because you now have like the mental and physical part of it?